trying to help support your business in this period of economic recovery and growth. So today we have a very familiar face presenting, Paul Bowen. He is our advisor with the Small Business Development Center. This is a partnership with the Chamber and Washington State University to ensure that we are able to provide you free business advising, and that is for small businesses in the Walla Walla area. Paul has been with us, I think, about 3 years total now. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah.
Okay, and the SBDC is an incredible network of advisors like Paul all over the state who help startups and small businesses as they experience difficulties and growing pains. So pointing your resources, helping you solidify your business plan, walking through any kind of regulations that are important to your industry. It's a wonderful partnership. They help a lot of businesses in our area. And like I said, we're just really excited to have Paul with us today and every day. His office is here at the Chamber of Commerce building. So Paul, thank you for joining us. And we're really looking forward to this session on retaining our workforce. It's a huge issue for everybody right now.
It is. Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. And appreciate the introduction to the Small Business Development Services. It wouldn't be possible without the Chamber of Commerce, so we really appreciate that partnership. We recognize that we have an issue when it comes to employees, employee retention. A lot of talk and discussion has been centered on what is called the Great Resignation that we've experienced over the past couple of years during the pandemic. And as I've studied a little bit more about the Great Resignation, I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I think instead we should really be focusing on some of the driving aspects and driving forces behind that, what are the motivating factors behind a lot of those transitions. And when I really look at it, I really like to look at it in terms of perhaps a great realization, and that is people that are seeking opportunities to expand their lives and really looking to realize more potential through their lives and through their work. So today we'll be focusing primarily on employee retention and some of the reasons why employee retention is critical to concentrate on and how it can help improve your business and improve your bottom line. So without further ado, let's go ahead and I'll share my screen because we have a PowerPoint presentation ready for you. Should be coming over now. Let's see. Is that right, Kyle?
Yep, that looks good.
All right, perfect. So as we mentioned, we know the problem. We know the challenges that we're facing. Just to give you a little bit of background as far as data is concerned, Walla Walla County at the end of 2021 was sitting right around a 3.6% unemployment rate. And that's just too low. We'd like to keep that between 4 and 5% for an optimal talent pool. Anytime that we're dipping around that 3.5, 3.6%, where we ended 2021, then oftentimes we're actually causing in the workplace, we're contributing to inflation through various factors. So on the bright side, the Q1 report for Walla Walla County was a little bit better, or quite a bit better, right around an optimal 4.5%. So we are seeing some improvements. Nevertheless, on a daily basis, we're hearing that employers are having a difficult time filling positions. So instead of really concentrating, and I remember early on in the pandemic, right at the heart of the pandemic, there were a lot of efforts on hiring bonuses, a lot of gimmicks to bring in employees. And what we thought is it's critical that we start looking at employee retention versus employee acquisition. We'll talk about why we want to look at employee retention versus acquisition. So let's start talking a little bit about what a business is. And This is a really simple statement at the top of this slide. A business is a collection of thoughts and actions. I want you to try to imagine all the thoughts and actions that go into a business. You'll soon realize the magnitude of that seemingly simple preceding statement. A business is a collection of thoughts and actions. I don't know that anybody's ever really described a business as a collection of thoughts and actions, but when you really think about it, it truly is. Everything about our lives is a collection of thoughts and actions, but especially a business. A business is relatively benign on its own. But when you add in employees, staff, humans in general, we really think of a business itself as a collection of those thoughts and actions of all the people involved in that business. So now that we've considered all the thoughts and actions that go into a business, start to finish, even before we get into an organization early in the morning, before we leave, and after we leave at night, it's still a collection of thoughts and actions. Now consider what percentage of those thoughts and actions are directed toward improving the happiness, motivation, and retention of your staff. Is it enough? Is it truly enough, considering employees contribute to the vast majority of the thoughts and actions that either build or tear down your company? They are truly the lifeblood of an organization. I want you to keep that in mind. That'll be a sort of a central theme as we go on. Really, how do we treat our employees? What are we doing for recruiting and retention practices? And is that a focus of our efforts and our thoughts? When we consider the fact that a business is a collection of those thoughts and actions, we really should put more attention and emphasis on controlling those thoughts and actions and making sure that they're positive. So we'll take a look at some of the costs of employee acquisition. There's a quote by Barbara Weltman, who led the US SBA, and in 2019 gave us the following quote. There's a rule of thumb that the cost is typically 1.25 to 1.4 times the salary, depending on certain variables. So if you pay someone a salary of $35,000, your actual costs likely will range from $43,750 to $49,000. So quite an increase. At the bottom of the page, you can see I put a link in there because we have some fantastic tools when it comes to calculating the cost, true employee cost. But let's talk about what it costs to acquire an employee. We have to consider advertising, interviewing costs, cost of labor to have someone spend time interviewing those employees, screening the employees. And then of course, there's a large cost when it comes to acquiring new talent and onboarding and training that talent. Then we have administrative time, a lot of efforts on the back end that you don't necessarily see. But it costs an organization a lot of time in administrative time. And when it comes to cost of acquisition, we could take a look at a few other things that we may not necessarily think about. That is lost productivity, customer service and errors, and lost customers. I remember a time that I had a restaurant, and it was very obvious to me that we were causing some damage when every time I would lose a member of the wait staff or the cook staff, someone would inevitably come into the restaurant and question and complain as to why that person that they really liked, that they had favored over the years, why they weren't there anymore. So we have to consider quite a few things, not only from a monetary standpoint, but also from a customer experience standpoint. Of course, we want to talk about the benefits of retention. We've mentioned costs. So cost reduction is a key component to concentrating on retention. Morale improvement, of course, is assisted when we retain our employees. We have experienced employees, the longer, of course, that we can keep them. Increased productivity, better customer experience, improved corporate culture, increased revenue, increased innovation, reduction in errors, and even employee retention credit. And if you're not familiar with that, Our federal government, through the IRS, has specific programs that are geared toward tax deductions for retaining employees. It's a relatively new program, and you can reach out to your CPA or accountant for more information on that. I want to share one particular model in which people can engage, and it's called a join, stay, leave model. You know, oftentimes we'll bring in employees, and of course we're very familiar with the screening process. We're very familiar with when employees leave, with exit interviews. But a join, stay, leave model is more of a corporate culture adaptation. So it's really concentrating on what are the driving factors behind why people join our organization, why they stay in our organization, and why they leave. And really putting an emphasis on truly understanding why you're driving people in and out of the doors of your business. So organizations can create a system to capture data surrounding the following three indicators. Why do employees join us? Why do they stay? And why do they leave? And how it's done is we're essentially capturing data through employee entry interviews. So that's really different than just your standard employee interview. What we want to do here is we want to ask the employee, what attracted you to our organization? Find out some of the motivating factors behind why people join the organization in the first place. We want to have roundtable discussions. This is something that's lacking throughout a lot of organizations. It's really engaging in communication with your employees. Find out what's going on in their personal lives. Find out what's going on in their work lives. Find out how you can help some of those pain points. You know, we all understand that there have been certain times throughout every employee's history where you're coming into work and you're really struggling with things either personally or at work that really motivate you not to come into work. And so we want to try to find out what some of those pain points are, or what are some of those motivating factors that keep people from work, and what are some of those things that are perhaps motivating people to look for other areas of opportunity at another organization. So really having those open communication discussions. We want to gain employee feedback through surveys, exit interviews, and post-exit surveys. So what is a post-exit survey? Well, really think about the last time you left an organization. On your way out the door, you may be still hoping for a good recommendation for a future employer, whatever the case may be. You may not be as forthright. Perhaps you're mad. Perhaps you haven't had time to digest what really took place. So post-exit surveys would happen after an employee has left an organization for a particular period of time. Reach out to that employee and just get their feedback after they've left the organization. Oftentimes it'll be much more candid, open, and honest. Here are some retention tips. We want to make sure that we're recruiting effectively. Word of mouth is fantastic. We can get better insight into employees. We can also understand how that employee is going to fit in the organization. We want to hire employees who embrace our vision and promote employees who enhance our vision. Think about an employee who really takes the vision of the organization and adds to it. There's a lot of value in employees that work for an organization. We all bring new experiences and different experiences. So imagine an employee that's actually enhancing your vision, that's giving you fresh and new ideas about how the organization can function better. We want to make sure that we provide adequate training tools and equipment. This is one big reason why employees leave an organization, is that they just say that they don't have the adequate training tools and equipment to do their job. We're going to watch a video next after this slide that's going to talk a lot about the number one thing that it impacts employees' happiness and their will to stay in an organization. And it really speaks volumes about training tools and equipment, because it really talks about what motivates employees, and that's their output. We want to respect all employees at all times. I think that's a given, and it's something that employees are really holding us accountable to, and rightfully so. Increasingly more, we really need to make sure that we respect our employees top to bottom. Direct and indirect remuneration. Remuneration, of course, is one of Henry Fayol's 14 principles of management, so absolutely critical. Direct remuneration, of course, is through pay, and the indirect remuneration is more of that work-life balance, making sure that our employees, and that's something that's once again really coming to the forefront of employees' attention, is, how does my work really enhance my life? And that's something that we can really accomplish as employers when it comes to indirect remuneration. We want to develop and enforce a safe work environment. If you think about Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the very bottom rung, the basis, the foundation of those needs, safety. Safety can come in a number of ways. If you think about it, safety in a workforce environment often means that we have confidence that we're going to have our job for a longer period of time, and that we are going to be able to feed ourselves, feed our family, house ourselves, house our families, etc. So safety is a pretty large chunk. That's obviously why it is the basis of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So developing a safe work environment, really, it is about our physical safety, our mental safety, our emotional safety, but also goes back to that remuneration as well. So safety can come in the form of pay. We want to seek honesty and trust throughout the organization. That really goes back to communication. Absolutely critical to have that open communication. Employees are demanding it increasingly. We want to offer job security that goes back to remuneration and safe work environment. Remember that safety component, the basis, the foundation of what it is that we're doing to create a safe work environment. We want to keep our employees busy but not overworked. This is something that we found, that I've found, and I really do study. The reason that I went into organizational management for my college degrees, that I really enjoy the psychology aspect of motivating employees. What makes us tick? What makes us want to come back into work and produce at a high level? And one of those things is boredom. So we really do need to make sure when it comes to our retention efforts that we're keeping our employees busy. There's nothing worse than feeling as though you're A, not contributing, and B, what in the world am I doing here? What is my purpose? And if we're not busy, we really do, those thoughts do creep into our mind as far as maybe I should be doing something different with my life. And then socialization, it is critical. We've really been hit with the pandemic has really taken an impact on our ability to socialize. But as we come out of the pandemic, I really encourage everyone to concentrate on socialization, make sure that we as a team environment in organizations, that we're having an opportunity to get to know one another and really as humans engaging with one another, because we do need that socialization. So up next is the most important tip for employee retention. That is oversight and recognition. Before we get into that, I'll tell you that I shared this video, and I'm going to give the larger version of this video. It's a 20-minute video, and I understand that that's a little bit taboo in a PowerPoint presentation, but every time that I've given this and I've shortened it, I wish that I hadn't, because it is a very powerful video and it speaks volumes to what motivates employees. It's really important and really interesting to geeks like me that love to find out what makes people tick, what makes people want to come into work. This is the #1 tip that I used to give all of my students at Walla Walla Community College. All of them that came through my management courses, leadership courses, entrepreneurship courses, they all heard this #1 tip: oversight and recognition. What does it mean?
Let's experiment today about I want to talk a little bit today about labor and work. When we think about how people work, the naive intuition we have is that people are like rats in a maze, that all people care about is money. And the moment we give people money, we can direct them to work one way, we can direct them to work another way. This is why we give bonuses to bankers and pay in all kinds of ways. And we really have this incredibly simplistic view of why people work and what the labor market looks like. At the same time, if you think about it, there's all kinds of strange behaviors in the world around us. Think about something like mountaineering and mountain climbing. If you read books of people who climb mountains, difficult mountains, do you think that those books are full of moments of joy and happiness? No, they're full of misery. In fact, it's all about frostbites and difficulty to walk and difficulty of breathing, cold, challenging circumstances. And if people were just trying to be happy, the moment they would get to the top, they would say, this was a terrible mistake, I'll never do it again. Instead, let me sit on a beach somewhere drinking mojitos. But instead, people go down, and after they recover, they go up again. And if you think about mountain climbing as an example, it suggests all kinds of things. It suggests that we care about reaching the end, the peak. It suggests that we care about the fight, about the challenge. It suggests that there's all kinds of other things that motivate us to work or behave in all kinds of ways. And for me personally, I started thinking about this after a student came to visit me. This was a student that was one of my students a few years earlier. And he came one day back to campus, and he told me the following story. He said that for more than 2 weeks, he was working on a PowerPoint presentation. He was working in a big bank, and this was in preparation for a merger and acquisition. And he was working very hard on this presentation. Graphs, tables, information. He stayed late at night every day. And the day before it was due, he sent his PowerPoint presentation to his boss, and his boss wrote him back and said, nice presentation, but the merger is canceled. And the guy was deeply depressed. Now, at the moment when he was working, he was actually quite happy. Every night he was enjoying his work, he was staying late, he was perfecting this PowerPoint presentation. But knowing that nobody would ever watch that made him quite depressed. So I started thinking about how do we experiment with this idea of the fruits of our labor. And to start with, we created a little experiment in which we gave people Legos and we asked them to build Legos. And for some people, we gave them a Lego and we said, hey, would you like to build this Bionicle for $3? We'll pay you $3 for it. And people said yes, and they built this Lego. And when they finished, we took it, we put it under the table, and we said, would you like to build another one? This time for $270. They said yes, we gave them another one, and when they finished, we asked them, do you want to build another one for $240, $210, and so on, until at some point people said, no more. It's not worth it for me. This was what we called the meaningful condition. People built one Bionicle after another. After they finished every one of them, we put them under the table, and we told them that at the end of the experiment, we will take all these Bionicles, we will unassemble them, we will put them back in the boxes, and we will use it for the next participant. There was another condition. This other condition was inspired by David, my student. And this other condition we call the Sisyphic condition. And if you remember the story about Sisyphus, Sisyphus was punished by the gods to push the same rock up a hill. And when he almost got to the end, the rock will roll over and he would have to start again. And you can think about this as the essence of doing futile work. You can imagine that if he pushed the rock on different hills, at least he would have some sense of progress. Also, if you look at prison movies, sometimes the way that the guards torture the prisoners is to get them to dig a hole, and when the prisoners finish, they ask them to fill the hole back up and then dig again. There's something about this cyclical version of doing something over and over and over that seems to be particularly motivating. So in the second condition of this experiment, that's exactly what we did. We asked people, would you like to build one Bionicle for $3? And if they said yes, they build it. And then we asked them, do you want to build another one for 270? And if they said yes, we gave them a new one. And as they were building it, we took apart the one that they just finished. And when they finished that, we said, would you like to build another one? This time for 30 cents less. And if they said yes, we gave them the one that they built and we broke. So this was an endless cycle of them building and we destroying in front of their eyes. Now what happens when you compare these two conditions? The first thing that happened was that people built many more bionicles. They built 11 versus 7 in the meaningful condition versus the scissors condition. And by the way, we should point out that this was not big meaning. People were not curing cancer or building bridges. People were building bionicles for a few cents. And not only that, everybody knew that the bionicles would be destroyed quite soon, right? So there was not a real opportunity for big meaning, but even the small meaning made a difference. Now, we had another version of this experiment. In this other version of the experiment, we didn't put people in this situation. We just described to them the situation, much I'm describing to you now, and we asked them to predict what the result would be. What happened? People predicted the right direction, but not the right magnitude. People who were just given the description of the experiment said that in the meaningful condition, people would probably build one more bionicle. So people understand that meaning is important, they just don't understand the magnitude of the importance, the extent to which it's important. There was one other piece of data we looked at. If you think about it, there are some people who love Legos and some people who don't. And you would speculate that the people who love Lego will build more Legos even for less money, because after all, they get more internal joy from it. And the people who love Legos less will build less Legos because the enjoyment that they derive from it is lower. And that's actually what we found in a meaningful condition. There was a very nice correlation between love of Lego and the amount of Legos people built. What happened in the Sisyphic condition? In that condition, the correlation was zero. There was no relationship between the love of Lego and how much people build, which suggests to me that with this manipulation of breaking things in front of people's eyes, we basically crushed any joy that they could get out of this activity. We basically eliminated it. Soon after I finished running this experiment, I went to talk to a big software company in Seattle. Can't tell you who they were, but they were a big company in Seattle. And this was a group within the software company that was put in a different building, and they asked them to innovate and create the next big product for this company. And a week before I showed up, the CEO of this big software company went to that group, 200 engineers, and canceled the project. And I stood there in front of 200 of the most depressed people I've ever talked to. And I described to them some of these Lego experiments, and they said they have felt like they've just been through this experiment. And I asked them, I said, how many of you now show to work later than you used to? And everybody raised their hand. I said, how many of you now go home earlier than you used to? Everybody raised their hand. I asked them, how many of you now add not so kosher thing to your expense reports? And they didn't really raise their hand, but they took me out to dinner and showed me what they could do with the expense reports. And then I asked them, I said, what could the CEO have done to make you not as depressed? And they came up with all kinds of ideas. They said the CEO could have asked them to present to the whole company about their journey over the last 2 years and why they decided to do. He could have asked them to think about which aspect of their technology could fit with other parts of the organization. He could have asked them to build some prototypes, some next generation prototype, and see how they would work. But the thing is that any one of those would require some effort and motivation. And I think the CEO basically did not understand the importance of meaning. If the CEO, just like our participants, thought that the essence of meaning is unimportant, then he would care. And he would tell, well, the moment I directed you in this way, and now I start directing you in this way, everything would be okay. But if you understood how important meaning is, then you would figure out that it's actually important to spend some time, energy, and effort in getting people to care more about what they're doing. The next experiment was slightly different. We took a sheet of paper with random letters, and we asked people to find pairs of letters that were identical next to each other. That was the task. And people did the first sheet, and then we asked them if they want to do the next sheet for a little bit less money, and the next sheet for a little bit less money, and so on and so on. And we had three conditions. In the first condition, people wrote the name on the sheet, found all the pairs of letters, gave it to the experimenter. The experimenter would look at it, scan it from top to bottom, say, and put it on the pile next to them. In the second condition, people did not write their name on it. The experiment looked at it, took the sheet of paper, did not look at it, did not scan it, and simply put it on the pile of pages, right? So you take a piece, you just put it on the side. In the third condition, the experimenter got the sheet of paper and directly put it into a shredder. What happened in those three conditions? In this plot, I'm showing you at what pay rate people stopped. So low numbers mean that people worked harder, they worked for much longer. In the acknowledged condition, people worked all the way down to 15 cents. At 15 cents per page, they basically stopped this effort. In the shredder condition, it was twice as much, 30 cents per sheet. And this is basically the results we had before. You shred people's efforts, output, you get them not to be as happy with what they're doing. But I should point, by the way, that in the shredder condition, people could have cheated. They could have done not so good work because they realized that people were just shredding. Maybe the first sheet you would do a good work, but then you see nobody's really testing it, so you would do more and more and more. So in fact, in the shredder condition, people could have submitted more work and get more money and put less effort into it. But what about the ignored condition? Would the ignored condition be more like the acknowledged or more like the shredder or somewhere in the middle? Turns out it was almost like the shredder. Now, there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is that ignoring the performance of people is almost as bad as shredding their effort in front of their eyes. Ignoring gets you a whole way out there. The good news is that by simply looking at something that somebody has done, scanning it and say, that seems to be quite sufficient to dramatically improve people's motivation. So the good news is that adding motivation doesn't seem to be so difficult. The bad news is that eliminating motivation seems to be incredibly easy, and if we don't think about it carefully, we might overdo it. So this is all in terms of kind of negative motivation or eliminating negative motivation. The next part, I want to show you something about the positive motivation. So there is a store in the US called the IKEA. And IKEA is a store with kind of okay furniture that takes a long time to assemble. And I don't know about you, but every time I assemble one of those, it takes me much longer. It's much more effortful. It's much more confusing. I put things in the wrong way. I can't say I enjoy those pieces. I can't say I enjoy the process. But when I finish it, I seem to like those IKEA pieces of furniture more than I like other ones. And there's an old story about cake mixes. So when they started cake mixes in the 40s, they would take this powder and they would put it in a box and they would ask housewives to basically pour it in, stir some water in it, mix it, put it in the oven, and voila, you had cake. But it turned out they were very unpopular. People did not want them. And they thought about all kinds of reasons for that. Maybe the taste was not good. No, the taste was great. What they figured out was that there was not enough effort involved. It was so easy that nobody could serve cake to their guests and say, here is my cake. No, it was somebody else's cake. It's as if you bought it in the store. It didn't really feel like your own. So what did they do? They took the eggs and the milk out of the powder. Now, you had to break the eggs and add them. You had to measure the milk and add it, mixing it. Now it was your cake. Now everything was fine. Now, I think a little bit like the IKEA effect, by getting people to work harder, they actually got them to love what they're doing to a higher degree. So how do we look at this question experimentally? We asked people to build some origami. We gave them instructions to how to create origami, and we gave them a sheet of paper. And these were all novices, and they built something that was really quite ugly. Nothing like a frog or a crane. But then we called them, we said, look, this origami really belongs to us. You worked for us, but I'll tell you what, we'll sell it to you. How much do you want to pay for it? and we measured how much they were willing to pay for it. And we had two types of people. We had the people who built it, and we had the people who did not build it and just looked at it as external observers. And what we found was that the builders thought that these were beautiful pieces of origami, and they were willing to pay for them 5 times more than the people who just evaluated them externally. Now, you could say, if you were a builder, do you think that, oh, I love this origami, but I know that nobody else would love it? Or do you think, I love this origami, and everybody else would love it as well? Which one of those two is correct? Turns out the builders not only loved the origami more, they thought that everybody will see the world in their view. They thought everybody else would love it more as well. In the next version, we tried to do the IKEA effect. We tried to make it more difficult. So for some people, we gave the same task. For some people, we made it harder by hiding the instructions. At the top of the sheet, we had little diagrams of how do you fold origami. For some people, we just eliminated that. So now this was tougher. What happened? Well, in an objective way, the origami now was uglier. It was more difficult. Now, when we looked at the easy origami, we saw the same thing. Builders loved it more, evaluators loved it less. When you looked at the hard instructions, the effect was larger. Why? Because now the builders loved it even more. They put all this extra effort into it, and evaluators, they loved it even less, because in reality, it was even uglier than the first version. Of course, this tells you about something about how we evaluate things. Now think about kids. Imagine I asked you, how much would you sell your kids for? Right? Your memories and association and so on. Most people would say for a lot of money on good days. But imagine this was slightly different. Imagine you did not have your kids, and one day you went to the park and you met some kids, and they were just like your kids, and you played with them for a few hours. And when you were about to leave, the parents said, hey, babe, by the way, just before you leave, if you're interested, they're for sale. How much would you pay for them now? Most people say not that much. And this is because our kids are so valuable, not just because of who they are, but because of us, because they're so connected to us, and because of the time and connection. And by the way, if you think that the IKEA instructions are not good, think about the instructions that come with kids. Those are really tough. By the way, these are my kids, which of course are wonderful and so on, which comes to tell you one more thing, which is much like our builders, when they look at the creature of their creation, we don't see that other people don't see things our way. Let me say one last comment. If you think about Adam Smith versus Karl Marx, Adam Smith had the very important notion of efficiency. He gave an example of a pin factory. He said pins have 12 different steps. And if one person does all 12 steps, production is very low. But if you get one person to do step 1 and one person to do step 2 and step 3 and so on, production can increase tremendously. And indeed, this is a great example and the reason for the Industrial Revolution and the efficiency. Karl Marx, on the other hand, said that the alienation of labor is incredibly important and how people think about the connection to what they're doing. And if you make all 12 steps, you care about the pin. But if you make one step every time, maybe you don't care as much. And I think that in the Industrial Revolution, Adam Smith was more correct than Karl Marx. But the reality that we've switched, and now we're in the knowledge economy. You can ask yourself, what happens in the knowledge economy? Is efficiency still more important than meaning? I think the answer is no. I think that as we move to situations in which people have to decide on their own about how much effort, attention, caring, how connected they feel to, are they thinking about labor on the way to work and in the shower and so on, all of a sudden, Mark has more things to say to us. So when we think about labor, we usually think about motivation and payment as the same thing. But the reality is that we should probably add all kinds of things to it, meaning creation, challenges, ownership, identity, pride, etc. And the good news is that if we added all of those components and thought about them, how do we create our own meaning, pride, motivation, and how do we do it in our workplace and for the employees? I think we could get people to both be more productive and happier. Thank you very much.
When it comes to employee recognition, the reason that we say, and the reason that we glean from that video, really one simple sentence and one simple thought, that is oversight and recognition. In order to truly understand and appreciate the meaning behind an employee's work, it's imperative that we have that oversight, that we know what they're working on. In order to recognize the value of an employee and their outputs, we have to know what it is that they're working on. You know, oftentimes we hear from employees, well, I don't want a manager that looks over my shoulder. And certainly that's not a good position to be in for a manager or an employee. And we don't want that. But what we do want is we do want to know what it is that our employees are working on and what their outputs are, so that not so much that we can obviously some of the benefits of understanding what it is that we're producing and how efficient we are, we should obviously know that, but also so that we can recognize their value, recognize their meaning. You know, as mentioned in Dan Ariely's talk, oftentimes as producers, our meaning or the meaning to that product, whatever it is that we're producing, is a lot higher than the evaluator. So the leader as the evaluator has to really take a different mindset and really look at it from the meaning and the value of that employee. Work output is meaningful to all employees, otherwise they wouldn't be there. We as leaders, as managers, as business owners, we need to make sure that we are putting in as much effort as possible to recognize that meaning. And as evaluators, to really soften our evaluation and recognize the meaning to that individual. So without that oversight to know what your employees are doing, yeah, it's nice. Even with a laissez-faire model of leadership or style of leadership, you can still have oversight. You still absolutely have to have oversight, because without it, you cannot recognize. And as mentioned in the video, this is the biggest demotivating factor, is when output is not recognized. So what have we learned? We've learned that retaining valuable employees should be a top priority. Retention is a verb, and retention should really be something that we are actively working on, thinking about. Think about the very first sentence that we started with, and that is the business is a combination or culmination of actions and thoughts. If we think about that, and we think about the small amount that we attribute, a small amount of time that we attribute toward those actions and thoughts, especially as it pertains to our employees' happiness, we can do a lot more. So it should be a top priority. We do need to take action. It cannot be something that's extraordinarily passive. This is something that does take action. The nice thing is, most of the things that I've talked about today are free. It doesn't cost you money to recognize an employee's efforts. We need to focus on leadership. There's a myriad of leadership styles, from servant leadership. I'm a real big fan of situational leadership, the Hershey-Blanchard model of situational leadership. But we really do need to focus on how the leaders of the organization are treating employees and how we are making retention a top priority. We need to get creative with the retention strategy, and above all, have fun with it. It shouldn't be something that is a negative task. This should be something that's extremely positive, because ultimately it does mean that your business is either going to succeed or fail. Whether or not you can retain those employees has a big impact on your ability to succeed as an organization. We want to make sure that we keep our employees happy. Our business will thank us. And it's something that is increasingly important. Employees are holding our feet to the fire, so to speak. And it's important. It's important to them. And if we're not concentrating on them, then our business is not going to succeed. We have to, and I know that this has been pounded in. This really does relate back to what Dan was talking about. We have to know what our employees are accomplishing. We have to recognize their efforts. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, that was really great. Lots of good info. We have some questions that have come in, but I would really like to remind people, use the Q&A feature at the bottom if you're watching on Zoom. Write a comment in the chat if you are on Facebook. Okay, so Paul, the first question, it came pretty early in your presentation, and it was about the Great Resignation. That's a term that I've heard a lot about. Is there a specific demographic of workers who are leaving in the Great Resignation? So is that a very specific kind of worker, male, female, old, young, what point in their career are they in?
Well, so we're actually going to be seeing a lot more of this. And, if you think about it in terms of the great realizations, people really looking at how do I enhance my life and how does my work enhance my life? And would another position be better? Could be something as simple as wanting to grow personally. But it could very well be something that where you want a better work-life balance. This is something that we always have to look at. Now, if you think about it in terms of demographics, we're really seeing a shift, generally speaking, from millennials and the younger generation really looking at life and work-life balance a little bit differently than what we've seen before. And we're going to see that trend increase as we compete against organizations who have a little bit better and easier time or easier entry path to, say, work from home models, for example, things that allow people a lot of flexibility in their time and time that they work, and perhaps even location that they work. So we have to compete. We have to understand that that is a trend that we're going to continue to see. And we have to think of ways that we as employers can balance that demand, because not every business model is adequate or perhaps advanced enough to be in a position where we can offer real flexible work schedules and flexible options that really is driving a lot of the great realization. So we have to balance that. It's something that we have to get ahead of, especially in a service-related community like Walla Walla. It's something that we have to understand is going to continue to attract talent away from organizations who don't have that ability. So we do have to get creative with our retention strategies, because it's not going away and it will increase.
Okay. We also have a request, Paul, if you could share your screen again. Back to the benefits of retention slide. Someone is looking for that information. And I want to remind people that we are going to post this slide deck on our website, along with links back to the video and any other information that you might be looking for. But we'll get this up for you so that you can review it right now. One of the questions that was asked, I think, Paul, you mentioned this. But if you could just mention it again from Michael, who's watching on Facebook. Thank you, Michael. He asks about the cost comparison between retention and acquisition. So if I remember this correctly, you said it's about a 1.4. The salary times 1.4 is what you're going to end up spending. Is that right?
Yeah, essentially, according to Barbara Weltman, essentially that's what it is going to cost, the true cost of acquisition. So when you think about somebody bringing somebody on board, now there are other costs. I had heard one time related to this subject that it takes 3 employees on average for a 4-month period to replace the efforts and output of 1 employee who leaves. So you think about that 4-month stretch when an employee leaves, that's 3 employees who have to take up the slack. So this quote is really just a general statement based upon the true acquisition of employee. But if you think about the costs to the organization that are kind of an indirect cost of losing an employee, that's where you really get up into the big dollars. You know, when you start having to pay 3 employees to do the work of 1, and yeah, that gradually declines over the course of time. But for that 4-month stint, when you lose an employee, 3 people have to pick up that slack, and that's very costly. I think once again, the biggest cost to consider is quality control issues, loss of customers, customer service issues, things of that nature. So when we're having 3 people pick up the slack, you're going to have things fall through the cracks. So I think that's probably a big cost that's very difficult to measure or quantify, but it's something that we have to consider. We know it hurts to lose an employee. We never want to do it. It's never good. It's never positive. Sometimes it is necessary. There are things, terms out there such as positive attrition, and that's fantastic, but you don't want to do it. It's not something that's a good thing. And once again, it's difficult to quantify in dollars some of that lost productivity and some of the errors, omissions, some of the things that directly impact our customers. It can be very damaging for years to come, just losing 1 employee.
Absolutely, and having lost an employee recently, it was a rough couple of months until we could get somebody here and on board. So it's really difficult, especially if you are a small employer and don't have a lot of employees already. It does put a huge burden on everyone else who is still there.
Yeah, we start to see a domino effect when we start to place some of those duties and functions and really burdens on other employees. Oftentimes we can see where that really drives morale down. So that's an excellent point, Kyle, that just losing 1 employee, that domino effect of having to carry so many hats and distribute some of the responsibilities of that lost employee can actually have a domino effect and impact and increase attrition even further just from that 1 employee being lost. So absolutely great point.
Okay, another question that we have. How much should I budget for employee appreciation? And I think with this question, maybe some budgeting strategies, like is there a ratio that's based on how much you're paying out in salary or a certain percentage of your budget maybe that you should dedicate towards employee appreciation?
It'd be too wide for all business models, revenues, net profits, tenure of the business, tenure of the employee. The business model is really important to consider when you're considering some of those things. Now, I remember I came from the call center industry years ago, and they were big into kind of handing out tchotchkes, little doodads that sit on your desk. And for the longest time, there was a distribution company. I cannot remember the name, but we used to receive a catalog, and it was really just a catalog full of junk. I mean, it was just junk, but we ordered so much from that catalog, and looking back, and that's why I really want to focus on some of the free employee retention strategies. Because looking back, I think as an organization, I would always advise an organization for ways to look for the things that don't necessarily cost money first. I think some of those can be the most important and impactful. Think about getting a present. You think, oh, it's the thought that counts. It truly is. When you receive a gift from a significant other and there's no thought into it, oftentimes we look at it, a pair of shoes that I wasn't really thinking about a pair of shoes, and it means nothing. And oftentimes you say, well, did you keep the receipt? It's because there was no meaning behind it. And so these little things that we buy or incentives that we purchase, oftentimes I'll try to steer people away, steer organizations away from those things and really concentrate on really what matters. And that is that oversight and recognition. All things, including indirect and direct remuneration, very critical. Everything that we've talked about, very critical. But in order to answer that question, I would say, no, there's no specific calculation or what I would budget. It really goes all the way across the board, depending upon your business model, depending upon your size, how many employees you have, locations, et cetera. There's so many variables to consider that I can't really give an answer there as far as budgeting. But my answer would be budget small. I really wouldn't spend a lot of money. I would save my money because I just don't feel like that approach that we used to take in the call center industry has much value anymore these days. So employees these days just don't really care too much about those type of things. So short answer, budget small, and then place a lot of emphasis on some of the free things like oversight and recognition. I can't say that enough.
Paul, as you were talking about that, it reminded me that at last year's business summit, we had a session called Maximizing Value, and it was focused on corporate benefits. And the folks over there, we had Peterson Hastings and Payne West Insurance who conducted that session. And when Matt from Payne West was talking, he had a slide about non-traditional benefits. And a lot of the things there were free. I'm going to go ahead and put the link in, but it's at the 55-minute and 30-second mark of this link that I'm going to post. But it is just a really interesting list. So things like flexible work schedule, adding what he called flex time, which could amount to days where you could volunteer at your children's school or a service club that you're a member of. Things like gift cards. The one that kind of blew my mind were benefits surrounding pets. And he said that you can offer insurance that people can purchase as a benefit for their pets. And you as an employer don't actually have to buy it, but you can just offer that. And then also something called paternity leave, where when you get a new puppy or a kitten or whatever pet you get, you take a day off, spend it with your family, enjoying this new pet. And little perks like that you can offer that really truly are of little or no cost to you as a business, but they go a really long way in showing your employees that you care about them, that you want them to have happy and balanced lives, and that you care about their families. So I'm going to go ahead and post that video here. Remember, it is at the 55-minute and 30-second mark that you'll be able to find that list. The whole webinar is pretty valuable. Post that there in the chat so everybody can see it. This webinar and all the ones from last year too are still up on our Facebook page, and you can get to those if you need. Those are all the questions that we've had. Paul, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. Again, this video will be available immediately on our Facebook page. You can also find it later on our website along with the slide deck. As always, Paul is here at the Walla Walla Valley Chamber of Commerce. He's here to help and assist your business. If people want to come in and talk with you, Paul, about an issue that they're having or an idea that they would like to implement, how do they get a hold of you and schedule an appointment?
Oh, I can drop my email address and phone number in the chat, but really easy to get a hold of me through email, or you can come into the Chamber of Commerce. We offer, once again, no cost business advising services. We are a nationwide organization with 37 locations throughout the state of Washington. If you need to get a hold of me, just email me at paul.bowen, paul.bowen @wsbdc.org.
Okay, and there's that email address for you in the chat as well. Thank you everyone for your time and for watching. We will be back again tomorrow with a really great webinar from Cole Massey, who's going to be talking about the 5 P's of social media. This is a really important session because it is going to be kind of like social media 101. And we are going to be offering 5 additional webinars that will build off of this one. So it is applicable to whatever platform you use. If you are someone who's using a lot of text, it's great for you. If you're someone who's visual, it works great for Instagram as well. Whatever your efforts are in social media, these will really help you create a better strategy. around the content that you utilize. And again, it's going to set the stage for more specific webinars about specific platforms or specific tactics that we're going to get into later this year. So thanks again to our sponsors, the Port of Walla Walla, the City of Walla Walla, the Blue Zones Project, and the City of College Place. Of course, how could we forget? Thank you all very much. Thanks, Paul, and we'll see you all tomorrow with Cole Massey. Bye, everybody.
Bye.